everybody, to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We are here in our fourth season for our November episode, our pre-Thanksgiving episode, moving into week number 12 in the fantasy football season. Today we are being joined by Tyler Coleman. Tyler, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a fun football season so far, so I'm looking forward to another good discussion with you guys.
And also being joined by Parker Rose. Parker, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back. Like what Tyler said, very weird NFL season. Looking forward for the playoffs.
Well, what's interesting here is, Parker, your team, 10-0. Your team, Tyler, 9-1. My team has a shot for first place. Here on Thanksgiving, the football team has a shot to host a home playoff game. So I'd say all of our teams doing pretty well. One team, and we have to do a quick shot at Brian, since he's not here today, that he should be just ashamed of his team. Although they did pick up a victory against the Vikings, which actually was a very good game this past weekend. So, well, our goal here today is to kind of recap what's been going on over the past month in fantasy football. We are coming up to the home stretch of the regular season. For most of your leagues, only 2 weeks remain until the playoffs. Some leagues obviously are different. Some leagues go to week 17 as well, so maybe you have an extra week. But for most ESPN standard leagues, there's only 2 more weeks left, meaning you are probably in a must-win situation at this point, whether it's just simply to get that first-round bye that you want, or whether it's even to make it into the playoffs. So what we're going to be here doing today is to try to give you some ideas of some sort of start and sit type people, and also taking a look at our top 25, but also our top 10 quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, as well as taking sort of an early look at the fantasy MVPs, ending the show with our waiver wire pickups and our Super Bowl preview. So let's start, and we can kind of work backward to our top 25. I want to start at quarterback, because I honestly think that the quarterback position this year has really been up and down. You have the preseason Dak Prescotts and Carson Wentz's of the world. Of course, Dak Prescott suffered that gruesome injury not right after we just got done, saying how wonderful he was in our last podcast. In terms of that, another quarterback that was on pretty much everybody's top 10 was Carson Wentz. I kind of want to throw this out there before we get into our top 10. What has happened to Carson Wentz? Have you guys gotten to see any of the games? Parker, I mean, have you seen him play lately? What is going on with him?
Fred Miller, it's a good point. I was actually on social media last night, on TikTok more specifically, and there was an Eagles fan actually saying how it's Carson Wentz's fault. But I looked in the comments to see what other people were saying. There's people saying it's Wentz. There's people that's saying it's not Wentz. I think it's a mix of everything. Wentz is the one throwing the ball, throwing the picks, but his line is hurt, that allowing sacks. And Doug Peterson looks clueless. But I think it's time for Jalen Hurts to get a start to see if he could turn something around, because there's a stat that Wentz has a worse QB rating than even benched quarterbacks like Mitchell Trubisky, who was benched, Tua, Nick Foles. Like, they all have better quarterback ratings than he does.
It blows my mind. I did get to see a good bit of the Browns-Eagles game. At the end of that first half, when he just threw that horrific throw and ran it back for a pick six, I mean, look, I don't care who you are. You cannot make that throw in the NFL. And, that cost them, frankly, the game. Here, I think it's a combination of a few things. No Deshaun Jackson, no Zach Ertz. I mean, basically his 2 top weapons. Goddard's been out for much of the year. You're relying on guys like Fulgham, who've stepped up, and even, Rieger, who has played okay. But again, to your point, Parker, offensive line, in and out. Peters, in and out. Kelsey, in and out. Lane Johnson, in and out. Your right tackle is a guy that only started playing football a couple of years ago. I mean, Tyler, what are your thoughts on the Eagles, who everyone thought was a pretty big lock to make the playoffs, which I guess they still are in the pathetic division, but 3-6-1 at this point?
I mean, I agree with both of you guys. I think it is Wentz. He has a big role in throwing the interceptions. I mean, he really has become a turnover machine this year, but like Parker said, it's hard to play good when your line isn't protecting you. And I agree with the comment he made about Doug Peterson. I've watched games, and I'm just kind of like, where is this play calling coming from? But another thing I noticed, it also looks like Wentz is afraid to take a hit sometimes. I know he's had those injuries, so I've seen times where he just kind of like tries to throw the ball away and doesn't really pay attention to maybe what he's doing, which is causing some of those turnovers.
Well, I think Wentz is, if you're still trying to start Wentz, I would look to the waiver wire at this point. I mean, you've got Wentz on a total points. He's down beyond even Taysom, well, not Taysom Hill, but down beyond people like Matt Ryan, Brady. He's in the area of Stafford, Tannehill, now Burrow on IR, Breeze on IR. It's pretty slim pickings down there. He's right around the same people who have really been basically dropped at this point. So I found that pretty interesting. All right, well, I want to hear a little bit more from you gentlemen about your top 10 quarterbacks, because frankly, the way you drafted, you might have a couple of these people on this list and might be trying to play matchups. So going forward, how do you rank your quarterbacks, Parker?
So 1, I have Patrick Mahomes still. 2, I put Aaron Rodgers. 3, I have Russell Wilson. 4, I bumped Justin Herbert to 4. 5, Josh Allen. 6, I have Kyler Murray. 7, I have Phillip Rivers. 8, I have Lamar Jackson. 9, I have Big Ben. And 10, I have Deshaun Watson.
My, how the mighty have fallen. Deshaun Watson pretty low, but Lamar Jackson all the way down at 8. Why are you such a hater on Lamar Jackson?
He's struggling. He said that they know his playbook. Well, when you're doing RPOs and running every play, they're gonna get. Lamar Jackson been in my other league, Professor. He's been on my bench since week 4. He's not producing the numbers.
I think what's interesting about Jackson is he is on pace for another 800, 900-yard rushing season, already 103 carries. But here's the big difference from last year. Last year he had over 10 touchdowns. I don't remember off the top of my head. Only 3 scores this year. I think that's what's really brought him down. And again, he's not nearly putting up the gaudy numbers he did last year. In fact, he's got just a few more yards than Cam Newton, and Newton missed several weeks because of being on the COVID list. So, I mean, Lamar Jackson really only averaging less than 200 yards a game, really not picking up that additional slack on the ground. Still 575 rushing yards, which is impressive, but if you're only throwing for less than 200 yards a game, it's not going to get it done.
He might not have no choice but to throw this because of with them having COVID issues with J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram out. And J.K. Dobbins, he's a workhorse in that backfield for the Ravens offense. He's averaging almost probably 6-7 yards a carry.
And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of the running backs, but I would honestly say that I'm frankly really disappointed with both Ingram and Dobbins and Gus Edwards throwing in there. Now, Edwards should have an okay game this week. Everyone's rushing out to pick up Edwards. Don't forget, the Steelers are the number 1 rush defense. So don't just rush out, pick him up, and just assume he's going to have a big day. They also like Justice Hill, which I actually think might be a better pickup for this week because he catches more out of the backfield than Edwards does. Edwards, not much of... In a PPR league, I might consider playing Justice Hill over Gus Edwards. So let's hear your top 10, Tyler.
Okay, so number 1, I have Patrick Mahomes. Number 2, I have Kyler Murray. Number 3, I have Justin Herbert. Number 4, I have Josh Allen. Number 5, Russell Wilson. Number 6, Aaron Rodgers. Number 7, Lamar Jackson. Number 8, Deshaun Watson. Number 9, I'll give him credit, Ryan Tannehill. And 10, I have Ben Roethlisberger.
No Brady in the top 10?
Is
this just recency bias after last night's game?
Well, if you think within the past month, he's had 2 bad games, if you go back to the Saints game as well. So between that game and last night, which is one reason why I kind of was like, maybe he should get knocked out of the top 10.
Gosh, when you look back at the last couple of games, obviously the game against New Orleans really stands out. 2 points in our scoring. 22 of 38 for 209, 3 picks. He's not picking you up much on the ground, but here's the reason why I still have Brady in my top 10. Only 3 games this season that he hasn't had at least 2 touchdowns. And of course, the game against the Chargers with 5 touchdowns, a 4 against Las Vegas, and a couple 3s and several 2s. He's at least averaging you about 20 fantasy points a game. Now, there have been a couple clunkers. There's no question about that. But the upside there with Brady is what I like, not to mention the fact that he has got, without a doubt, the best receiving core in the history of football when you just look at the names. Antonio Brown, formerly a number one wide receiver, like number one, not just a team's number one. Godwin could be a number one. Evans, Gronk, even people like Cameron Brate. You got Scotty Miller in there. He's just got the absolute, it's amazing, the receivers he has. Now, last night, that brings up some problems. So this is going to be released Wednesday, but Monday night's what we're talking about. That could bring up some problems once we get to the wide receiving core. But it also brings up problems with the running backs, too, because even though Fournette was out there, who dropped 3 passes, and Ronald Jones still not in the game. I don't understand what Bruce Arians is doing in the running back situation. Ronald Jones is clearly the better back. Well, Fournette looks lost.
What's frustrating is Ronald Jones had that big game last week against Carolina, and then to see him not get involved, it's kind of like, what was Arians really thinking?
I just don't understand it. And after Fournette dropped those 3 passes, because I was in a league where I had Kupp, I was losing going into the game. I had Kupp, and the person I was playing against had Fournette. So the first drive of the game, I'm like, okay, I'm golden. Kupp had like 6 catches on the first drive of the game, and then basically didn't really catch another ball until almost the fourth quarter, and then Fournette vultured that touchdown. And I'm just sitting here thinking, what does anybody see in Fournette at this point? He can run for 2 yards right up the middle, but he's not explosive running the outside. He blew, I can't tell you how many blocks, and that's part of the reason that Brady really struggled. I mean, let's give the Rams credit. Their defense is really incredible. Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, they really showed up to play last night. I was very impressed with the Rams.
Yeah, but we also got to know Tampa Bay did lose games they shouldn't have lost. Like, they're on the risk of, such a high-powered offense. They're risk to fall to 6-5 after this week.
They threw out a stat last night during the game that said Brady has never played in the playoffs as a wild card team. Which I never realized that, but that would be kind of crazy. There's no way they're winning that division now, especially losing to the Saints twice.
Well, I just want to chime in with my quarterbacks here. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes. I got to tell you, that drive, and I stayed up to watch this game. I've been trying to stay up to watch the late games. Sometimes it's a little difficult for me because I get up so early, but Vegas drove right down the field, and Mahomes has the ball with, a minute 48? It wasn't even 2 minutes. And what do you make? 4 passes, touchdown. I don't ever remember a better orchestrated 1-minute drill in my life. And Mahomes, to me, he's just got nerves of steel. Nothing phases him. It's really quite incredible. And even the game that they lost to Vegas was really, really hard fought, and they were in it the whole game. It's not like they got blown out. I don't see how anyone can put Mahomes anywhere but number 1 personally, though it is important to note Kyler Murray averages more points and has over 23 more fantasy points than does Mahomes. Of course, that's because Murray, 10 rushing touchdowns. But again, for me, I'm taking Mahomes. Kyler Murray, I have second. Russell Wilson, I am number 3rd. Aaron Rodgers has been very impressive this year, and you probably got him pretty late if you drafted him. I do have Lamar Jackson at 5. I'm hoping, and maybe this is a hope, but I'm hoping that Dez Bryant might actually be a significant add for him. Again, I think with Jackson, number 1, the league caught up to what they were doing in Baltimore, but they have no receivers. Mark Andrews, yes, but who else do they have?
Their offensive line also took us Ronnie Stanley, their best lineman, who, I got a fact, never allowed the sack.
Really?
Never allowed the sack in the league. That's
impressive. And what's interesting about Stanley was he signed a massive contract extension and then tore his ACL that weekend. Pretty wild. But I do think Jackson is going to get back to a relatively decent fantasy impact player. Josh Allen at 7. I apologize earlier. I do have Deshaun Watson at 7 and Herbert at 8. Brady at 9, and then Big Ben I threw in there. Interestingly enough, Big Ben, you think about how good of a season he's having. He's in the bottom half of the top 10, even into the teens in ranking, which is odd to me because he is one of the most consistent quarterbacks in all of the NFL. The worst game he's had all season was 10 at Cleveland week 6, but the last 3 weeks, 25, 29, and a decent 16 this week. So I like Big Ben. Let me ask you, Parker, as a Steelers fan, What are you? I mean, 10-0. I mean, you can't beat that. But what is different in Roethlisberger this year that maybe not in previous years?
I just think he wanted to prove to people that he still got it after his injury. Like he's looking like he's not hurt at all. The last couple of years when he played, you could tell he was playing hurt.
Well, I think that he's had a whole year off, so the rest really could have helped him.
And he also has great faith. Like Juju's being a good mentor to the rookie and younger wide receiver core. And I think Ben being back has actually just helped motivate the team because, like, we talked earlier about James Conner having a rough season last season and the rough first week. Ever since then, James Conner now could probably be considered a top 10 running back in fantasy right now.
Oh, without a doubt. They don't have anybody else.
So I think that the team is just really motivated. I honestly think that our toughest competitor right now is the Kansas City Chiefs.
Well, I don't think that's going out on a limb there. I think that's pretty obvious. Could it be the AFC title game for the two of them?
I'm not saying anything because I don't want to jinx anything. But also, like what we mentioned about the Chiefs in Las Vegas, I won't count Las Vegas out. Las Vegas is playing one heck of a season.
I wouldn't mind putting Las Vegas up there if it wasn't for what Mahomes did to them in the last 2 minutes of the game. It was unbelievably impressive, and I'm sure that Tyler appreciated that for sure. Well, I want to move on to running backs here because I think the running back position has really shaken up as well. When we last met, Dalvin Cook coming off a pretty major, seemingly, injury that he ended up not really he missed one game because of that. But I want to talk about some of the people in the top 10. My top 10 has shaken up quite a bit, especially with the recent injury to Christian McCaffrey, who is week to week at this point, already doubtful for week number 12. So I'm interested to hear what's the top 10 from you gentlemen. We'll start with Tyler.
Okay, so number 1, I have Dalvin Cook. Number 2, I have Alvin Kamara. Number 3, I have Derrick Henry. Number 4, I have Aaron Jones. Number 5, I have James Robinson. Number 6, I have Ezekiel Elliott. Number 7, I have Josh Jacobs. Number 8, I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Number 9, I have Antonio Gibson. And then 10, I have James Conner.
I'm glad that you got Gibson in there. He was somebody I wanted to talk to. Now, as a Chiefs fan, why so low on Helaire?
Because especially ever since I brought Le'Veon Bell in, you're not sure what you're going to get from Helaire. I mean, yes, this week he did just put up like 20 points, but then the 2 or 3 weeks previous to that, I think it was like close to single digits. So as good as he is, as a fan, I appreciate the fact that they're not overusing him. So fantasy-wise, he might not always be great, but as a fan, I like that they brought in Le'Veon and kind of resting Helaire a little bit.
Here's one of the things that I wanted to point out. I totally agree with you. When Bell was brought in, I was concerned about Edwards-Helaire, his usage. What I've noticed is, yes, way down on the carries, but still 12, 6, 12, and 19 fantasy points. Frankly, anyone who's in the backfield with Patrick Mahomes, liable to go off. And if you look, they have a pretty soft schedule in terms of defenses. While Tampa Bay is a tough run defense, you've then got Denver at Miami, at New Orleans, and Atlanta in the fantasy Super Bowl. Give me Helaire. I have him at number 4. Actually very surprised that you were so down on him as a Chiefs fan. Maybe just tempering your expectations.
Well, I mean, I have Kelsey and Hill high on my list, so I figured, I don't want to seem too biased.
Well, we're all a little biased when it comes to football. It's okay. Parker, what about your top 10?
I got Dalvin Cook at 1, Derrick Henry at 2, Kamara at 3, Aaron Jones at 4, Nick Chubb at 5, Zeke at 6, Josh Jacobs at 7, Miles Sanders at 8, James Conner at 9, and Edwards-Helaire at 10.
You guys are both down on Helaire. I got to be honest. I might be the lowest on Cook. My top 3 was really, really tough. And I think for all of us, between Kamara, Henry, and Cook, I think those 3 are clearly the 3 best players in fantasy football right now. I don't know that you would really be upset if you had any of those players. So it was really tough to rank. Obviously, Dalvin Cook has just been really on a fairly remarkable last few weeks. 48, 38, 14, and 25 over the past 4 weeks. The 1 week of 14 was at Chicago, who, say what you want about Chicago, that they're a pretty stout defense, at least the front 7. Coming up for Cook, Carolina, Jacksonville, at Tampa Bay, back to Chicago, and in the fantasy Super Bowl. at New Orleans. So not the most difficult schedule. Again, Tampa is tough in there, as is Chicago. What concerns me about Cook, the amount of carries that he's had, 30, 22, 30, and 27. Did have 2 weeks off before that. Does that concern you at all? If that's your number one player, that he's getting so many touches. I mean, typically in fantasy, you're like, hey, the more touches, the better. At what point does that kind of go off a cliff?
You make a point because he's injury prone then with that. But also I've been noticing it seems like Kirk Cousins is finally finding a little bit of a rhythm. Because we noticed the last couple of weeks, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson been getting touches and receptions and touchdowns. Let's see how it goes this week with Adam Thielen being on the COVID reserve list right now.
He's in the same situation as Roethlisberger was, where he was on the COVID list, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he has it. And if he tests negative for 5 consecutive days, he's able to play. So even though he's listed as out, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's not going to be there. I guess my concern with Cook is too much usage. I'm afraid he's going to get hurt, and I would put out there to any Dalvin Cook owner, if you don't have Alexander Mattison, you need to go get him, and if someone else has him, you need to trade a decent piece to get him, because whoever starts for Minnesota is going to be a top 10 play no matter what their name is. So that would be just a piece of advice that I would give. I wanted to give my top 10. I still have Kamara at number 1. And it's tough because when you look at his touches, they pale in comparison to Dalvin Cook's. I mean, the last 3 weeks, 9 carries, 8 carries, and 13 carries. It's just not what you're used to with Kamara. The thing is his receptions. I mean, he's got 67 catches for 648 yards, well over total yardage. No one else is even close, with 81 targets. I mean, receivers don't even have that. Plus, he's getting you, 10, 12 carries, only 500 yards on the season, pretty low on the rushing list, but 8 touchdowns. So he's like 4th in the league with 8 touchdowns, plus in a PPR league. I mean, he has got to be your number 1. Now, here's the question. First of all, interesting that the Saints went with Taysom Hill. I was actually really surprised by that. Any of you who play ESPN, do keep in mind that if you did play Taysom Hill at tight end, like I did in our show league, he is no longer eligible at tight end, and he will be a quarterback only for the foreseeable future. What were your thoughts about Jameis Winston not getting the start there when they paid him all this money to come in as a backup? Tyler?
I was a little surprised, honestly. Breeze going down for the Saints, I think, was kind of a big blow to them just because he was starting to play really well. But I don't know, starting Hill, it kind of makes me wonder, where is their trust right now in Winston? I would be surprised if we don't see him more going forward. I don't know how well Hill's going to play. I mean, they did beat the Falcons, but then again, that wasn't really the greatest team that he beat. So we'll see as they move forward with tougher competition.
Did you get to see any of this game, Parker?
It wasn't on, but me and Jarrett Rivera were down in the underground, and every time Taysom Hill's stats came up, Jarrett just shook his head because he did play a good game. But
do you see his throwing motion?
No, I didn't.
Oh my gosh! Any quarterback's coach would cringe if they saw somebody with that throwing motion. And he's good for what he is, but he's not a quarterback. He's not an NFL quarterback. And maybe he's going to go on and prove me wrong. But I foresee terrible things happening to the Saints if they keep running Taysom Hill out there.
The suggestion I made was I think the Saints, what they should do, if they let Taysom Hill start last week, I think they should give Jameis Winston a start this week and go based off who played better to start the third game. Because it's only, like you said, they gave Jameis Winston a big contract for being a backup quarterback.
Well, this was some of the analysts were saying they gave Taysom Hill a big contract too. Now he's more that gadget type player, that tight end, that Swiss Army knife as they call him. But they gave him a lot of money too, didn't they? They either franchise or transition tagged him, so he made a good bit of money. Even in the contract, if he signed a contract, he made a lot of money to stay in New Orleans. So maybe they wanted to kind of give him a shot and see what they had. They had a lead in the division. Jameis Winston likes throwing lots of picks.
Well, that's the thing. Breeze isn't coming back anytime soon, so that's a situation they're going to have to get figured out.
I would be also very surprised, to Parker's point, if Winston doesn't at least get a shot.
Did Taysom Hill even have a passing touchdown in his game, or did he rush on his touchdown?
He ran for both of them. But, yeah, so interesting there. I'm still... The point I was trying to make here, we're talking running backs. How does this impact Kamara? You would think they would run the ball more, and they did, except Latavius Murray got 13 carries in the game. I wonder if they're sort of going the opposite way with Kamara as Dalvin Cook, trying to limit his touches because they know they're going to the playoffs, or at least they have a really, really good shot, and they want to make sure that he's healthy. Kamara also been nicked up, missed some practice. I'm still going Kamara number one in the PPR league for sure. Dalvin Cook in a standard, but Kamara for me. And Derrick Henry. What an amazing run that he had against the Ravens last week. That was pretty incredible what he continues to do. And look, for years, guys, I've never had Derrick Henry on a team. I've never drafted him. I've never even thought about drafting him. But I got to be honest. The guy already has over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. You know, part of the reason I never drafted him was because he was never really active in the passing game, still not really active in the passing game. I mean, Christian McCaffrey has played, 4 games, and he has more catches than Derrick Henry does all season. So, still not active in the passing game, but does have 12 catches for 86. But, I mean, I guess you don't need it when you're a workhorse like that. So, those are my top 3. From there, I'm still high on Hilaire, and this is really where it kind of falls off the cliff. Zeke... He's had a decent year, but to be honest, it's not anything spectacular. He's getting the touches, but here's the last 4 weeks for Zeke. 5, 8, 8. He did have 19, but only bailed out with that touchdown reception. Very disappointing for Zeke. I guess really overall the Cowboys are just a general disappointment outside of Dak Prescott's wonderful 6 or 7 games he had.
And if you're watching the Dallas games if they're on TV, every time it's on, I see Tony Pollard in the backfield more. Like Tony Pollard, I actually did a FanDuel ticket, and I actually put Tony Pollard in, and he gave me some points to help me win a whopping $4.
Hey, I got to be honest with you. I'm just looking ahead. Pollard's one of the people that I have on my waiver wire pickups for the same reason that Alexander Madison is too. We're getting through the buys. There still are a couple more. Tampa Bay still has their bye yet, so that's going to be interesting coming up in next week, week 13. So there's still a couple more weeks of buys. But going to the playoffs, if you have any of these top running backs that we're talking about, you have to have their backups in case, like, if you have Hilaire, you have to try to get Bell. If you have Cook, you have to get Madison. If you have Kamara, you got to have Latavius Murray. Same thing with Derrick Henry, though I would say it's a little murky who's behind him because no one else gets any carries. So it'd be interesting to see what they would do there. One final person I wanted to mention here, Gibson from Washington. I continue to be surprised how efficient he is in the backfield. I noticed both of you had him in your top 10. What is it about him, Tyler, that you like so much about Antonio Gibson?
I just like how involved he's able to get. He's a good running back. Really, it's hard to bring him down. You know, he gets involved in the pass game, and really, he's become one of their top targets. For the quarterback carousel that they've had there, but I think he's one of the main guys that really they've looked for because they know that they can trust him.
8 touchdowns in 10 games, which is very impressive. Definitely a decent receiver, typically averaging about 3 catches a game. And now he's actually getting the ball. Multiple double-digit carries in 3 of his last 4 games, 5 of 7. So he's definitely getting the ball. But I think what's more important here, as a football team fan like I am, they're actually looking good offensively. I know that the Detroit was a heartbreaker, and the Giants game, don't even get me started on that one. But now with Alex Smith, they actually seem like they've got someone who can move the ball. And let's give a shout out to Alex Smith. Did you guys get to see that E60 about Alex Smith? I encourage everybody to go out and watch that if it's on demand or if you have ESPN Plus, to watch the E60 about what Alex Smith actually had to go through to even be able to walk, let alone play football. And how he's played the last 2 weeks it's really not only just inspirational. I truly hope that he's their quarterback next year. I really do.
He's comeback player of the year, too.
I can't even imagine how they don't give it to him at this point. Just an incredible story, but I do like Gibson. One point I wanted to make. Bryce Love, second-round pick out of Stanford, not last season, not this season, but last draft. A monster player in college, has not been on the field since that torn ACL that he had in that bowl game back when he was with Stanford. Has been not activated, but has been reinstated from the designated to return, which means that he has to be activated within the next 2 weeks, because they did this about 2 weeks ago. The only reason that I bring this up, if you're looking for a Hail Mary in terms of the playoffs of people to pick up, Bryce Love is only 1% owned right now. I wanted to bring that up now because if you have Antonio Gibson, maybe pick up Bryce Love as his handcuff instead of someone like McKissick or Peyton Barber. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back and talk wide receivers and tight ends, and then we'll finish up with our fantasy MVP and our Super Bowl predictions. We'll be right back with Fantasy Football Strategy Guide.
This is Dylan Kleintop, and you are listening to the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide.
You can't forget it's always wasted for the pain.
All right, we are back with the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide. We want to finish out by talking wide receivers, tight ends, and then we're going to come back and talk fantasy MVPs as well as some waiver wire pickups, helping you out on your final couple of weeks heading into the fantasy playoffs. I want to throw before we get into our top 10s, I want to throw two teams out there and ask, what do you do with their receivers? And I'm going to start with Parker. Parker, what do we do with the Steelers receivers?
At this point, it's with the Steelers receivers, the only one I would be confident with starting is Chase Claypool because he does get the targets. Deontay Johnson will definitely be your second receiver you better have. Third would be Juju, and then fourth, I would not even worry about James Washington.
I guess that's the question, though. Coming into this season, Juju was, I'm not saying he was at the top of the draft by any means, but, when you think about it, you thought that he was going to be the guy, and that just hasn't been the case. It's really kind of been a three-headed monster. I mean, Deontay Johnson last week had 11 catches and
100 yards receiving.
Yeah, I mean, so in PPR, he's getting you 20 points. I got to be honest with you. I'm very surprised. Juju seems like he's having a really poor year, and he claims he doesn't care. He just wants to, he's happy that the Steelers are winning. But gosh, it's almost kind of troubling. 58 for 535, 5 touchdowns. It's not terrible, but when you look at, he's had 17, 13, 21, 22, and then the 5. I'm just curious, how do you even know? What if you have multiple of them on your team? What do you do?
It depends on where you're at in your situation. If you are pushing for the playoffs, I would try trading to get one of them. If you're someone like already in position spot, I would weigh it week to week. Like, definitely Chase Claypool is a good flex to start. Like, if you have top receivers, Chase Claypool is your flex. But same with Johnson, because Johnson, he does get hurt easily and he does make mistakes, but he's fast. He is a fast receiver that puts up points.
Johnson has, we were talking about Ronald Jones earlier. Listen to this season. This is starting in week 2. 23, 0, 1, 29, 1, 13, 23, 23. I mean, he is the definition of boom or bust. And in fact, only one average week 1 with 10. So I'm curious. I think it's tough to sit any of these guys at this point, but you never know who's going to have a good game. I guess really, again, to your point, Chase Claypool, 10 touchdowns. He's got to be one of the people they're all, I guess, relatively good plays, but Claypool seems to be the most consistent. The last 6 weeks. 17, did have the one against Tennessee, 14, 14, 21, and 15. Definitely finding the end zone as well. I think you're in good shape, but I don't see any of these three in the top 10, though.
It all depends on the defense they're matching up against and who is matching up on who. Like, obviously, if Chase Claypool has a better week than Deontay Johnson, the best defensive back's going to be on Claypool. That would give Deontay Johnson more respect. And same with Juju Smith-Schuster. The Steelers have 3 good wide receiver threats that the CBs are like, who do we match up on? But that also gives chances for Eric Ebron to starting to catch the ball a lot more. Yes, he's dropping a little bit and Ben's overthrown, but granted, he's getting targets.
Absolutely. I think Ebron is what's interesting, and we're going to talk about this in a minute. The tight end is just desolate right now. You could do worse than starting Ebron. Tyler, I want to go to you. What about the Bucks? We have just went on and on previous podcasts about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Of course, this was even before Antonio Brown has been a part of it. What do you do with the Bucks receiving core, including Rob Gronkowski?
Honestly, outside of Mike Evans, I don't really know who else you can trust. Godwin has had the injury issues, and he seems to kind of be the forgotten man right now. So I don't really think you can trust him. Brown, I know when Brown came back from his suspension, everybody picked him up real quick, and he seems to be doing okay. I mean, he seems to be right now. He seems to be Brady's second target behind Evans, so I think you could trust him more than Godwin. But it's hard to tell because Gronk, it seems like they're trying to throw to him a lot more now as well.
Even so, with the last 2 games with Antonio Brown, Godwin's still 15 and 18 points. Evans is actually the one that Evans is finding the end zone more. I'd also say that Antonio Brown, they're taking some deep shots to him. Even in the Monday night game, they took a really deep shot to him, and he was open, and Brady just didn't hit him. Same thing happened the week before. Did you guys see the stat, what Brady was doing for 20-plus yard passes on Monday night? It was like 0 for 8 with 0 yards, plus 20 yards. I think that the more possession-type receiver like Mike Evans is probably going to be a good start. But what do you do if you have 1 or 2 of these pass catchers in Tampa? You know, you drafted Mike Evans, Chris Godwin as top 10, top 15 wide receivers. Now you're getting to the point where you can barely start them at this point. So what do you do, Tyler?
Potentially try to trade them away to pick up maybe other areas of need. I know, we kind of went over top 10 running backs, but outside of that might be an area you can upgrade. You could always use tight end help. So if you're at a point where you're feeling that, you can't really trust these guys, you could always look to try to trade and get help in other areas.
Let's start with our top 5 because I'm thinking that it might be pretty similar. So Tyler, top 5 at wide receiver.
Okay, number 1, I have DeAndre Hopkins. Number 2, I have Tyreek Hill. Number 3, Devontae Adams. Number 4, DK Metcalf. And number 5, Keenan Allen.
Interesting. You have 5 of my top 7 there. Parker?
I have DeAndre Hopkins at 1, Devontae Adams at 2, Tyreek Hill at 3, 4, DK Metcalf, and 5, Michael Thomas.
Okay, so this is basically we've hit on my top 5. I did have Lockett at 5 and Metcalf at 6, but I think that could go either way. Michael Thomas seems to be the enigma of this entire football season. Not only from an injury week 1, even when he's back, Breeze not really looking his way, punching a teammate. Now that he's back, Taysom Hill's looking for him, and he had a decent week last week, but Taysom Hill, no touchdown passes. I'm concerned, and I have Thomas at 4 moving forward, but I'm definitely concerned. I have DeAndre Hopkins with that unbelievable Hail Mary catch that he caught 2 weeks ago, but then comes back this week and he's 5 for 51, pedestrian. Larry Fitzgerald has 7 catches. So interesting there. I'm going to chalk that one up to just the Cardinals not really playing a great game there. I do have Tyreek Hill at 2, Devontae Adams at 3, Michael Thomas, and then Lockett and Metcalf, and then followed by Keenan Allen. At 8, I have the Washington football team's Terry McLaurin. McLaurin, one of the most underrated picks, and this is not even just a homer thing. McLaurin, I just saw a stat, more receiving yards in his first year and a half, so his first 24 games, than T.O., Larry Fitzgerald. I mean, he's got 871 yards, only 3 touchdowns, but he's as consistent as you can get. Double digits in every game except week 5 at the Rams in PPR. And yes, he only has the 3 touchdowns, but he's as solid as it gets. Did McLaurin crack anybody else's top 10?
No.
But very surprised
But
by
you do
that.
make a point, though, for how inconsistent the quarterback situation in Washington. You got to give him that credit. Because the 3 touchdowns, you got to remember, Dwayne Haskins start that season. He's terrible. Allen is done pretty much for the
Yeah.
season. And then now, maybe with Alex Smith, he might see some more touchdown passes, definitely.
Alex Smith really hasn't thrown. I think he's only thrown one touchdown pass. He's thrown for a lot of yards, but again, Gibson's getting those touchdowns. This all goes back to my original question. No Bucks, no Steelers in our top 10s, and maybe even if they are, it's really just kind of speculation at this point. I also have Thielen and Diggs round out my top 10. You guys want to round out your top 10? Even just saying the players that are in there?
I have Thielen, Lockett, Allen, Evans, and Chase Claypool at 10.
So it seems like that we're all pretty much in agreement as far as the top 10, maybe a little different of an order. But see, that's the thing. I would put Godwin, Evans, Claypool, Johnson, Schuster, all of them could be up there, but I'm just so concerned with the way the Steelers are splitting the ball up as the way the Bucks are splitting the ball up too. Are you really going to feel that confident about them over somebody like an Allen Robinson, a Stephon Diggs, or an Adam Thielen that are clearly leading their team in targets?
Allen Robinson is so hard to predict because that Bears offense is just not trustworthy. And that's not to say it's Robinson's fault, but when Foles can't get him the ball, I mean, what can you
Look
can
how
you
many
do?
times he overthrew him when he was wide open.
I think what's interesting about Allen Robinson is he is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. Interesting to see where he goes. But back to Allen Robinson, Tyler, to your point, double digits in every game except for one this season. Now, it's not eye-popping. Last 5 weeks, 10, 11, 20, 15, and 10. But to be honest with you, at least that's consistent. And it's not to say that Evans and Godwin haven't been consistent or Claypool and Johnson. But it's, if there's a bad passing game, there's too many mouths to feed there. I'm just kind of interested to see where that goes. Any one to add there in a top 10 that we didn't mention, Tyler?
I have A.J. Brown from Tennessee.
And I think that he is absolutely a valuable. And again, Corey Davis has actually had a very interesting season. A.J. Brown is one that I think is very, very close to being up there, averaging 16.1 points per game. Did miss some games earlier in the season, but the last 5, 27, 12, 20, only 3 against Indianapolis, and then 16 last week. Averaging a touchdown a game, too, which certainly doesn't hurt. So definitely interesting there. Well, we get to the last position, the position that I call, what are we doing here? Okay, so preseason, Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz. We're the top 3, all last season, top 3. Well, guess what? Kittle, hurt. Who knows when he's coming back? He was having a decent season. Ertz, hurt, wasn't having a decent season. Who knows when he's going to be coming back, if at all, this year, which has left a significant issue at the tight end position, unless, of course, you have Travis Kelce. I actually have Travis Kelce at number 6 overall because he is outpacing the next person by a mile. It is incredible how far ahead that he is in front of other tight ends. He is just, again, even with all those mouths to feed, he has been able to consistently put up points. Last 3 weeks, 24, 25, 26. Did have a 6 at Denver, but then before that, 24, 22. So 5 of 6 games, Tyler, 20-plus points. How is this continuing to happen for Kelce?
Well, because you can trust him. I mean, it doesn't matter where Mahomes throws the ball. You know Kelsey's going to catch it. And between him and Hill, after that, it kind of falls off a little bit. You never know what you're going to get with Watkins or Demarcus Robinson or even McCole Hardman's in and out. So you know with Kelsey that the ball's going to be going to him, and it's hard to cover him because he's such a good route runner.
I'm to the point, I never would probably take a tight end in the first round, but I got to tell you, next year, if you're sitting there middle of the first round, you could do a heck of a lot worse than Kelce. And I can't even imagine trying to make a trade for him at this point because I don't think whoever has him is going to give him up. It's just really surprising. I guess it's not surprising. What's surprising is how good he is and how much better he is than all of these other tight ends. Parker, what are some other thoughts that you have? Honestly, I don't even really want to go into the top 10 here because beyond the top, I'd say 3, Kelce, Andrews, and Darren Waller, I would say that we're probably all in about the same area. There's pick a name out of a hat at this point. You know what I mean? Who is another tight end, Parker, that you want to keep your eye on? Maybe if people can make some trades for him.
T.J. Hawkinson of the Detroit Lions.
And what's so interesting to you about Hawkinson?
with everything going on in Detroit, he seems like he is when you're down on the goal line, it seems like Matthew Stafford's looking him a lot more like Matthew Stafford played terrible last week. But if you look at his yardstone, a lot of them went to TJ Hawkinson. And I'll be honest, beginning of the year, I drafted TJ Hawkinson, and I sat right there and I said the Detroit offense is terrible. But
It's shocking.
It seemed like ever since I made that statement, TJ Hawkinson stepped up, and he is my starting tight end every week over, forgetting the league who I have in that, but I think he's starting over Hunter Henry, actually.
Only 2 weeks without double digits. A 9, and then against the football team only had 3. Dropped the big pass going into the end zone in that football game. But anyway, I guess what's interesting here is he certainly is a decent play, and he's ranked 4th overall at tight end. That just goes to show you how pathetic tight end is. He's averaging, 11 points a game, and he's the 4th ranked overall tight end. I mean, that's pathetic. I got to be honest with you. Who's a tight end that sticks out to you to keep an eye on? Although I think that's a very good point there, Parker. Tyler, who's a tight end you want to bring up?
Oh, that's tough. I agree with Parker. I had Hawkinson in my top 5. Maybe Jimmy Graham, just because he can kind of slot in behind Robinson. Another one I know we've talked about before, Jonnu Smith there in Tennessee. So
you want to talk about someone else who's up and down, and he's constantly getting injured. I will say Graham definitely is sort of more boom or bust. He's had some big games. He's had a 24 and a 17, and then some clunkers like this week against Minnesota, didn't even register a catch. So really, that boomer bust situation, it's sort of up in the air. Jonnu Smith, this is somebody who I've been rolling with in some leagues, and I gotta be honest, he's the number 5 overall tight end, but again, he had a 2, a 1, and a 4 in 3 consecutive weeks, and guys, since week 6, he's only had 1 game of more than 2 catches. Listen to this: 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 4. And last week he had 4 for 20 and had a touchdown. And that's the only reason that he even scored 12. I'm getting off of the Jonnu Smith bandwagon. I would rather play Jimmy Graham, who's got a shot at putting up more points. Fortunately, I had Taysom Hill at tight end last week, so I didn't have to play Jonnu Smith. But that is our 5th ranked tight end in fantasy football, somebody who hasn't had more than 2 catches the last 6 weeks.
tight end, I think it's safe to say the tight end position this year has become sort of a wasteland because after Kelsey, Waller, Andrews, you really don't know.
Goddard had a decent game, but even his first game back, he only had 2 catches. Somebody that I was really, really big on, and I actually made a move for in a league that I had Kittle, Gronk. You keep falling into the same situation here. Yeah, he's catching touchdowns. In fact, prior to Monday night, 4 of 5 games he had a touchdown. But in the middle there, he had a 1 catch for 2 yards against New Orleans, and last night 2 for 25. They're looking for him, but I don't know. There's too many mouths to feed there. I can't imagine you'd feel too pleased going into your week matchup that you have to win with Gronk, who in the last 3 games has had 1, 13, and 1. In the game with 13, he only had 2 catches and a touchdown. So I got to be honest, vast wasteland at tight end. Really just kind of throw a dart, and I guess just cross your fingers and hope Kittle and Ertz come back if you've been hanging on to them after a while. So anyway, I want to take just a minute and take a look at fantasy MVP at this point. Very interested. Maybe it's some people we've already talked about, but I want everybody to go around and pick one. If you had to pick a fantasy MVP, pick one and give me a why. Parker, I'll start with you.
I'm going with Derrick Henry, only because he was consistent pretty much every week. Like, if Dalvin Cook probably wasn't injured and missed a week, it probably would be him. But I have to say Derrick Henry because I don't think he missed a week.
No, just his bye week.
And every single week he played, he put even with the Steelers' best run defense, he still got running yards. He still put some points up because I have him in the league, and he didn't disappoint me at all 1 week.
He had an 8 against Jacksonville. He had a 6 against Chicago. Otherwise, 15, 26, 18, 40, 15, 17, 11, and 20. So, I mean, there's no doubt about it. He is consistent. I think that's very important in fantasy football. And again, at Indy, he's got Cleveland, at Jacksonville, Detroit, and Green Bay for the rest of the season. I can imagine him, approaching with 6 games left, 2,000 yards. He's at 1,100. 6 games left. Does he have a shot? Maybe not. Maybe that's being aggressive. But with the teams that he has remaining, he's going to have 1,800 yards and 15 touchdowns. I'd say that's pretty much a lock at this point. So, interesting play there. Tyler, what are your thoughts on fantasy MVP?
Well, I'm going to throw this one out here. Might be a bit of a stretch, but I'm going to say Justin Herbert. Really, just because this was a guy who wasn't even starting at the beginning of the year. They were going with Tyrod Taylor, and then after his injury, they threw him in there, and it's like, okay, well, he's a rookie starting, and he's just went off. We might not have seen a lot of him because the Chargers don't get a lot of national attention, but Herbert, for somebody who we really didn't know what he was going to do at the beginning of the season, he has done really well.
It's really quite amazing, and I don't want to say that no one drafted him because he definitely was drafted. But gosh, I mean, he hasn't scored less than 25 points since week 3, and even in week 3 he had over 300 yards. I mean, he is just... I think they've really found something in Justin Herbert, and I appreciate that you're talking fantasy MVP because if somebody got him in the late rounds just as a flyer, and now he's their starting quarterback, could be the reason that people win a fantasy league. I am going to go in a different direction. Tyler, as much as I love Travis Kelce, and I think that he would certainly be deserving of this award, I have to go with Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, the rushing yards, the acumen for passing, he's put up some huge points. And yes, he was taken in the first few rounds, but he was still probably the 3rd, 4th, maybe even 5th quarterback off the board. And right now, he's leading the league in average points per game and fantasy points at the quarterback position, even in front of Patrick Mahomes. So I would say, at this point, my fantasy MVP is Kyler Murray. So we have Kyler Murray. Parker, you had Derrick Henry, and Tyler, you had Justin Herbert. Very interesting. And imagine there might be a scenario where somehow you have all 3 of those people on the same team if you drafted Herbert as your backup. You know what I mean? Imagine that. So, all right, quick roundtable of waiver wire pickups going into this week. The waiver wire is thin, but find me a gem out there, Parker.
I'm going with Alex Smith. If you are an owner who had Joe Burrow after a traumatic leg injury, unfortunate for him, I'm drafting out. You need a quarterback. Alex Smith is probably your most reliable one.
And I also, again, it's important to note Brady's going to be on a bye yet. There's still a couple of other teams that have byes coming up. Alex Smith, you certainly could do worse than. And 16, 15, and 11 over the last 3 weeks, not great, but certainly probably the best you can find on the waiver wire at this point. It looks like Alex Smith only rostered in 17% of leagues, so very good. Tyler, waiver wire pickup.
I'm going to go with Corey Davis in Tennessee. He surprisingly is only a 47%, which he slots in very nicely behind A.J. Brown, and Tannehill's been finding him a lot. So even if you don't really start him every week, he's a good option to take off the bench, maybe to put in your flex.
This is actually really surprising. He did miss 2 games earlier this season and had a 0 against Chicago. I don't remember if he went out hurt, but he's had double digits every other game, 17, 12, 11, 15, 26, 11, and 16. Pretty impressive for a second receiver there in Tennessee, and certainly worth a shot. I have a couple. Now, I already mentioned earlier Pollard. Not only is he, if you have Ezekiel Elliott, you got to pick this guy up. But I think he might have some mixed league potential, even if he's still playing with Zeke. I really like him. And again, what happens if, at this point, you're just kind of taking shots on people? What happens if Zeke gets hurt? You know what I mean? Like, Pollard's instantly going to be a top 10 running back. They're tough to find. The big one I wanted to bring up, which I was shocked to see what the ownership of this person was, but Michael Pittman at 41.9%. Did miss a few weeks, but the last 2 weeks, Phillip Rivers has come live and has been looking for Pittman with 19 and 15 over the past 2 weeks. I'd also point out Brashad Perriman is out there with the Jets. I think he could be okay, but frankly, I wouldn't be caught dead putting anybody from the Jets on my fantasy team.
Can we go on the limb and say Carlos Hyde?
Carlos Hyde, I'm interested to see what happens to Chris Carson. They've been saying for Chris Carson that he is going to be back for like the last 3 weeks, and he hasn't played. Hyde actually looked decent in their last game. 14 for 79 and a touchdown, 16 points. The game previous to that he played 15 points. So definitely worth Carlos Hyde just to take a look. He's right at about 50%. But again, interested to see what happens with Chris Carson.
Speaking of running backs, I just want to throw this guy's name out there, especially over the past 3 or 4 weeks there. Wayne Gallman from the Giants. Ever since Barkley went down and then Freeman went down as well, I think in the past 3 weeks he's had 5 touchdowns and easily put up double-digit points, so I've been impressed with him.
I'm concerned what happens when Freeman comes back. I know that they brought him in on a 1-year deal, so I don't really think that he's doing much. He's at 55%, but definitely four consecutive weeks with touchdowns. Looking at his stats, they're awful, but he is getting in the end zone. So more power to Gallman. So there you go. We gave you a few waiver wire pickups. This time, we're going to end here fairly quickly. I just want to hear who is going to be in the Super Bowl and who's going to win it. Parker?
For how much I want to say my team in the Super Bowl, I don't want to jinx anything, so I'm still going to go with my pick. But with my pick, I think Seattle is taking that Super Bowl.
Who are they going to play in the Super Bowl?
At this point, with with everything struggling with the Ravens, it's the AFC Championship game will probably be Pittsburgh and the Chiefs.
I can't imagine how it's not at this point. Of course, you never know, but I would imagine you have to pick one of those two teams.
I'm going to take my team over the Chiefs, of course, but you're going to have probably the top-ranked offense going against the top-ranked defense, and we're in store for a great game if this happens. And then based off that, I think the AFC team will win the Super Bowl no matter what.
Interesting.
I don't think the Seahawks could beat either the Chiefs or the Steelers.
Interesting. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
I think Parker makes a good point. I think that it's going to come down to the Steelers and Chiefs in the AFC, which is going to be interesting, especially with really there's not any point of home field advantage this year with no fans. So if Kansas City goes into Pittsburgh, I still think they're going to have a good shot to win. But I've been saying all along, I think it's going to be the Chiefs and the Seahawks, which I kind of wanted to second guess and say the Saints because they've been playing better. But with Drew Brees going down, right now I'm going to stick with the Seahawks and go with the Chiefs winning.
I also have the Chiefs and Seahawks in the Super Bowl. I wonder, though, I really think it's going to be important what happens in that division, because if the Seahawks have to play that extra game, that wild card game, I think that might be more difficult. But even though the Seahawks had a couple down weeks, you got to give the Seahawks a ton of credit. They've looked great. I have the Seahawks and the Chiefs, and I got to go with the Chiefs. I was so impressed by how Mahomes just drove down the field last Sunday night. It was really impressive. I'm sure as a Chiefs fan, you appreciated that. So, we are, that's going to do it for another episode of the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide, and we'll be back with you here next month in December. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Tyler, as always, it's a pleasure to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys inviting me, and it's always fun talking fantasy with you guys.
And Parker, as always, one step closer to graduation for you, sir, and we just appreciate you being here.
I'm glad they got the opportunity to be a part of the podcast. Like Tyler said, I enjoy talking football and fantasy with you.
And of course, today we did miss our friend Brian Cristiano, one of the first podcasts he's ever missed, but he is working, so we won't give him too much of a hard time. But we hope to see him back next time on the podcast. Well, for Tyler Coleman, for Parker Rose, for Paul Miller, we will see you again in December on the Fantasy Football Strategy Guide.
You can't forget it's always wasted for the hand away. No use to try to say